Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This bigger show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the return of Once Upon a Time, as well as the series premiere of Time After Time. Like always, if I'm talking about something you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So for example, if you don't want to hear what I have to say about the latest episode of Once Upon a Time, you can skip to what I had to say about the series premiere of Time After Time. But first, we're going to talk about the return of Once Upon a Time, which I'm super excited to have it back. This is a very good episode, obviously picking up where the winter finale left off with Emma and Regina trapped in that fake wished up world. I'm surprised we didn't spend more time in there. I was kind of expecting it to be like a longer kind of arc thing of them kind of getting back home, but no, it's like, no, the situation was basically resolved in one episode, but I'll kind of run through some things. So basically to get back home, they have to find a way home now because the bean is kind of gone, so that's their only solution there. But then Emma gets the idea, it's like, well, one way to kind of get to Storybrooke originally from the Enchanted Forest was the wardrobe that she was put in, and it's like, oh, who should I go see? And it turns out they visit Pinocchio. I mean, obviously he looks the way he does present day as... Isn't his character's name Augustine? I'm pretty sure that's it. Well, I mean, his Storybrooke name is Augustine. Gets his help about the whole situation, which a big part of this episode is kind of a combination of the overall story is changing your fate plus a combination of not having enough confidence in yourself. It's kind of something that is the parallel between the Augustine storyline, Pinocchio storyline, and the Regina storyline. Because, well, in Pinocchio's case, it's like, he's like, I'm not good enough to replace my dad. My dad would be the one to be able to fix this wardrobe situation, but I'm not good enough for it. Which during that circumstance, I do appreciate the fact is that we saw an older Killian. The fact is he's like, you know, got a big gut and everything. And then like, she's like, wait, what? Why are you here and everything? He's like, well, I was hired by the, like, you know, kingdom to retrieve you and everything. So it's like, okay, so you're still a pirate, but now you're more of a mercenary. It's like, would he as a pirate have ever taken a job like that? I mean, maybe he just fell on some low times. I mean, it's something we never really got to dive into. Like, I mean, go ahead and breaking it down. Like, you never get to fully explore that world. And I feel like it's such an interesting world that, like I said, I always love what if type of situation. I'm pretty sure I brought this up the last time with the last episode being the whole fake world that was created where villains were heroes and heroes were nobodies. Was back in season 5? What's that? Yeah. I think that was season 5. Or was that season 4? Either way, you know, during the whole Arthur situation, I say that word sometimes, I think. Nevertheless, so I really appreciate it, but I'd love to kind of dive into this world a little bit more, because obviously we got a peek at it a bigger look at it last episode. Now we just took a even further peek and only got to see what some of the characters, like in this particular case, Killian, as well as Robin, which, kind of going along those lines, kind of like I brought up with Augustine, like the whole situation with Regina is she wanted to check and see if Robin led a good life or not. Because to her, she wanted to know if she actually did the right thing being with him. Because to her, it's like, maybe in this world not being with me, I mean, obviously he's still alive in this world, so that's a plus already. So it's like being with me ultimately led to, you know, events played out because he was with me and he ended up dying. It's actually sad when you actually think about it, because like obviously as the evil queen you would assume, you know, you saw Regina the way she was, and she was always a very like confident person, but deep down it's like she's very insecure, and you know, she doesn't have much faith in herself, and it's so sad. Like, there's a lot of people that believe in her, but I think deep down Regina does, because I think sometimes like Regina doesn't give herself enough credit. She doesn't think she's worth loving, you know, that she does more harm than good. But it's like, no, you've made up for your past. Obviously it's still an ongoing thing, but you've shown yourself time and time again to not be a villain but to be a hero. You've stood up, you've always done the right thing, and it's like, you know, of course there are people that love you, you know, and it's like, it's not a wrong thing that Robin loved you. It's not a, you know, it's not a bad thing that he died, you know, sacrificing himself for her or whatever, because because that's what you do for someone you love. It was never a mistake. There was, it's not like just all bad stuff that came with being Regina. There was a lot of good to go with it too. But like I said, she doesn't have much faith in herself, so she wanted to ask Robin himself, which Robin's life is not quite the same. It's not quite better either. The fact is that he's not Robin Hood. I steal from the rich and give to the poor. It's I steal from the rich and give to myself. Because we find out in this situation, he wasn't with Marion, which he talks about the fact this Marion died some years ago. I don't know if that I don't think that well, that might be connected to Regina, because it doesn't seem like Robin, when Marion, who was actually Zelena, obviously came back at the end of season 3, as throughout bits of season 4, but it was like, I don't think Robin ever really knew that. The fact is, the reason why the way she originally died was by Regina's hand. I think maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. And I don't ever remember that really necessarily being clarified. Because obviously Marion kept bringing up, I was like, oh, it's the evil queen. How could you want to be with the evil queen and everything? But then it was like, obviously, once again, it's kind of a situation where it's like, well, that was Zelena the entire time. So it's like, she was obviously adding more fuel to the fire with the whole situation. But nevertheless, so it seems like because he never fell in love in this particular world, he never felt that warmth to become the hero that she knows him to be, the very caring person that she knows him to be. So it's also interesting that he was actually one of the few people to immediately believe. Well, obviously, Pinocchio too, but he was one of the few people that Regina was like, okay, and that's what happened. He's like, so there's another me out there who ended up, who stole from the rich, gave to the poor, and was also with you, Well, I guess that other me had a pretty good life. She's like, you believe me? He's like, I'm locked up in this whole circumstance. Why wouldn't I believe you? And it's just like, you see that moment. And then also the moment, like, she actually tells him the truth about what happens. Like, oh, he died in, the world and everything. And it makes her sad and she's crying. And just like, don't cry, Regina. You're going to make me cry if you cry. Really, it's just like, it's just like, it's kind of interesting. I should state, like, Regina's that character that you want all the best for. It's like you invest so much in her because you want things 100% work out for Regina, which things have worked out to a certain degree, but obviously not always 100%. But it's like, because the circumstances of why she became the evil queen, and it's just circumstance upon circumstance, and you see who she is now, and it's like you want the best for her. So it's just how my mentality, like my brain thinks about it. But it comes down to it. And I was kind of interested. I found it very fascinating when the person that suggested, like, oh, taking Robin, it wasn't even Regina who came up with that. It was actually Emma being a good bestie, being like, no, bring him with you. She's like, I don't know if that's the right thing to do or not. Because basically, Emma's kind of a good thing. This episode kind of brought about Emma deciding, like, oh, I can change my fate. Her mentality about everything changed because she's got the sword, and she even was talking to Pinocchio about the whole situation of like, oh yeah, I'm destined to die, especially this sword that's going to kill me. But then she kind of learns that, obviously fate's not 100% set in stone, because like obviously she ends up finding like a little swan, and she asks Pinocchio about it. He's like, oh yeah, it's from a story. She's like, the ugly duckling. And he's like, yeah, how do you know? It's like, back in the story, well, in their world, obviously we saw it at the beginning of the episode, it's in like in 1990 in Minneapolis. A young Emma basically ran away from her foster family, and a boy, not too much older than her, came to her and was like, hey, the fact is that, you shouldn't be here. It's like, oh, the ugly duckling story. Because Emma had the mentality, the thought that like, belief that like, oh, the ugly duckling was a swan the entire time. Like, from the very beginning it was a swan, just didn't know it. And, Pinocchio's like, no, I'm thinking, it turns out it was Pinocchio. It's kind of like, no, what I really think this story is really saying is the fact is that if you believe hard enough, in this case, the ugly duckling believed it was a swan. It believed hard enough and believed so strongly that it made it changed itself, it changed its fate and became a swan, that basically you can do the same thing. And he's the one that kind of got her going to go back. So her life would be a lot different if it wasn't for Pinocchio, which, to be fair, is kind of like it's not even just that one moment. Even from the very beginning, like, obviously he wasn't always there. He kind of let his responsibilities to look after Emma kind of slip because he just kind of wanted to live his own life, do his own thing. But then eventually, it took him a while, but eventually he did kind of take it upon himself to, kind of go back to that duty, he's always kept an eye on Emma to make sure things didn't go too awry. So I am wondering, because I thought it was like, it wasn't until like his late years, until he was like probably like early 30s or something like that, when he started taking his responsibilities seriously again. Maybe he always did it. Like, obviously, I don't know. Like, that's just something to me. I thought like he didn't really start caring about Emma again until he was in his late 30s. But maybe it was like even throughout those years, he did still keep an eye on her from time to time. But maybe it's not until like he really got older that he really took the like leap into it. Like, no, I gotta get Emma to this whole Storybrooke situation. Maybe he just tried to keep her on the right path, because the whole point is like, hey, make your own destiny, you make your own fate. And that's kind of what Emma kind of got from all of this. And so she's like, no, you know, even if this is a fake world or anything, we don't know what will happen if we bring him with us, but why not try? You care about him and everything. And it's like, because also the thing he has with him is a feather that he, you know, hands to her. And she's like, oh, it's a feather that he originally wanted her to have anyway, but it got lost. Because remember, she got super pissed at Zelena for losing it. It was like the last thing she had to remember Robin, and it was like it was gone, but now it found its way to this Robin. And they get back, all of them, even Robin, which to me, my mind is set on so many interesting things. Like, I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. The fact is that world isn't fully explored, and I feel like it's not completely gone. I feel like there's going to be more from that. Like, I don't know whether it's going to be stuff from that world bleeds over into this one. Someone summons in there, in particular Gideon. Obviously, I'll get to his side of the story of this episode, but I'm thinking it has to be something like that. I don't know. That's what I'm chalking it up to, because I feel like there's so much more to that, especially with the whole Robin situation. Like, obviously he's being brought over to this world. He's got to like relearn all the stuff that he learned back in like season 4 of the show, when he originally left Storybrooke and had to go to New York with Marion and his son, who, you know, obviously Marion was actually Zelena once again all the entire time. So I just feel like there's going to be a lot more to that storyline. There has to be. Why? Because once again, it's a situation where no one can be 100% happy. It's like, oh, she's happy again? It's like, yeah, let's rip Regina's happiness away. But, you know, kind of steering away from that for a little bit, let's go once again to Gideon's story. I'm very interested by the fact is we find out Gideon's motivations. Well, obviously, like, he was kept by the Black Fairy in whatever world they were in. Obviously, time worked differently, so he was spent like 28 years there. Interesting that he would be 28, because, you know, Emma was 28 when she originally became, well, not necessarily originally became the savior. She was always a savior, but 28 is how old she was when she originally came to Storybrooke. But what I find fascinating is the fact is that his motivation is like, oh yeah, like, no, the Black Fairy tried to break me down, make me go towards evil, but it's like, no, I fought back against her, and it's like, what I'm gonna do is I'm here to kill Emma. I am, and to do that, I'm going to kill her so that I can become the savior, so that I could go back, save the world that's controlled by the Black Fairy, and become a hero. It's like, wait, what? So that's what this is all about. Literally everything is all about you just because you want to be the hero. It's like, granted, your dad's already been down that route. As I brought up earlier, the whole world where it's like villains are heroes and heroes are nobodies. It's like, yeah, he tried that. Did not work out that well. So it's a situation that I appreciate, because it's like obviously you have Belle even going to David being like, yo, David, I need you to not like let my son get hurt. I won't let him hurt your daughter. It's like, neither of our children have to be hurt in this situation. Because David blames himself because he's the one that made the wish that, oh, Evil Queen gets what she deserves. And he thinks that obviously she got what she deserved. She got turned into a cobra. Well, I don't know if it's necessarily a cobra, but a snake, whatever the case may be. And he kind of blames himself. He thinks she's here because of his wish. Now, what I found, but going back to it, it's like, obviously Belle's trying to stop him, but it's a situation where at first I was like, is Rumpel trying to stop him, or is Rumpel like, because Rumpel's like, oh, let me help you, which Rumpel kind of, obviously Rumpel had a very interesting childhood, obviously he knows that, his dad is who would later on become Peter Pan, and obviously, as you can see, both his parents, not good people. And like he brought up, like he didn't have a necessarily good childhood. Basically, he doesn't want his son to make the same mistake that he did. Because to him, Rumple kind of surrounds him. He's drawn the people of light because it's like the fact is he doesn't want darkness to be his destiny, but he just can't quite give up that power, and he doesn't want his son to make that same mistake, thinking that once he kills Emma, he'll gain that light and be a hero, not realizing that that's what's going to push him just that one step closer to darkness. I mean, because the mentality he has of wanting to save the world, it's like, why not join up with Emma? I guess because in his mind, it's like, oh, every story, every place has its savior. So Storybrooke in this world / the Enchanted Forest has Emma. Obviously, Agrabah had Aladdin. So it's like, oh, I'll be the one for the world that the Black Fairy took over. Which is like, obviously, there's more to that situation because it's like, why would she let you go? I don't think he's in a state where he's actually more powerful than her. Maybe he is, but I wouldn't think so. It's like, what does she want? Why was she, like, it seems like she kind of tortured him. Like, he never really went into full details about all the things she did to him, but it's like, my question is, why would you do all that to your own grandson? Like, what is her ultimate goal? I feel like maybe Gideon thinks he's doing this for the good. I mean, obviously, this is all him trying to fight his destiny himself. That's another thing, too, because it's like he's trying to prevent himself from becoming evil. So, trying to be, like he said, the hero, which we ended up seeing, in the fight against Emma. I was thinking, because I could have sworn, maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but I could have sworn in a vision it was, that Snow White was there. That the people there were Hook, Snow White, Prince Charming, and Henry, and obviously Regina shows up later, but it's a situation where they're always from the very beginning. Even the Oracle that was talking to her was like, yeah, it's not 100% set in stone, and like it's just a possibility of where your future going. So that's why I was thinking, like, obviously this isn't going to be the fight, but Emma did summon up the power and knock him back. But it's a situation where like she was had her, like the sword to his neck, and it's like Rumple was kind of like, don't kill my son. So if he had not said that, would Emma have done it? I don't think Emma would have, because she's not a killer. Like, I mean, I know it's such a weird distinction between killing and destroying something. I mean, obviously Gideon's got his own plans, but what those plans are exactly, and you have Rumple being like, yeah, we need to stop him because he feels like there's a war coming to Storybrooke if they don't. But now we have him and Belle working together. There's so much being set up by this episode that I so appreciate, because it's like, now we got to work together to stop Gideon. Like I said, Robin's back in town. I just feel like we're not done with that other world. I don't think it disappeared from existence, even though it was never meant to exist. Maybe it's going to be a situation where Gideon calls forth all those people from that world to come and fight in this world. It's like, oh, fight for your existence, because if you don't fight, you'll cease to exist going forward or something, because this reality will completely overwrite your reality that's yours. Just a thought that's kind of in my head about those situations. Because like I said, they brought it up, and it's such an obvious thing. Like, why is it that Robin is the way he is? The fact is that he didn't age and whatever. It's like, obviously, it's almost like he was put there specifically so that Regina would bring him back. I'm being hopeful. I hope he's not some kind of trap that was set for her. Like I said, because, Regina, I'm want, obviously for everyone, but definitely for Regina, I want her to have her happily ever after, and maybe this will bring her one step closer to it. The question is, what's this going to do about her whole son situation? What about the whole Zelena situation too? It's like her baby's there, and that baby's Robin's, so that's going to be weird and awkward. I mean, would this lead to Regina actually forgiving Zelena, because technically she has Robin back now? Granted, it's not the Robin she had, because even there was that moment when he came through because she thought he didn't make it through, she hugged him, and then she was like, oh, sorry. He's like, no, it's okay. Just because she's like, okay, you look like him, but you're not the Robin I know. So it's like, we got to take time to kind of get to know each other. Even though I kind of know all this about you already, it's like, I got to let you get to know about me. So I'm very interested, because like that's another thing too, fixing Zelena and Regina's relationship. Because like I said, the Robin situation was what tore them apart. But now that he's back, will that change anything? I mean, it still doesn't change the fact is that her Robin is dead. So is he just going to be kind of like considered like, oh, you're the other Robin, Then it's going to be a situation of like, oh, he's trying to figure out who he is. It's like, well, I'm not really Robin because the real Robin is dead. So what does that make me? Am I just his replacement? It's like trying to find out who you are, trying to be, once again, kind of a well, I say once again, I don't know if it's in this recording or not, but it's an existential type of situation, which I kind of puts him on board with Regina, like I said, because Regina, out of anyone, her and Emma have probably the most existential aspects to their character of just like, what am I supposed to do? Like in Emma's case, it's like, I'm the savior. Don't really know 100% what that means. Obviously, it means protecting the people I love and everything. That's kind of the gist of it. It's kind of how she describes it. But it's like, beyond that, not really 100% sure what I'm supposed to do. It's not like a clear-cut title job of like this. There's no guidebook to it. You just kind of have a feel for it. Also, what happened with... Oh, never mind. I kind of answered my own question before I even asked it. Nevertheless, and in Regina's case, it's like obviously the whole existential crisis about like who she is, like, trying to be good, battling the darkness in her and everything. I'm also curious to know what happened to Snake, Regina Evil Queen. Does Gideon have her? Will he at one point turn her back into a human so that she could be his ally in this whole situation? What does that mean going forward for Regina? Like, like I said, like if she stays in snake form, does that mean, what does that mean? I doubt it'll be forever. So it makes you wonder, will the Black Fairy pop up in Storybrooke? Like I said, it's so interesting that Gideon's here by himself. And the fact is that he's talking about the fact is going back and saving that world from the Black Fairy. So obviously she's still there doing her own thing. So it's like, does Gideon not realize that he's actually being controlled or something like that? He thought he broke free, but she maybe wiped his memory and sent him on his way, making him thinking he's doing all this on his own volition when it's actually her kind of puppeteering him from the distance. Who knows? Very good episode, and I'm very interested to see where we go next episode. And now moving on to the series premiere of Time After Time. So I'll say I really like the show. I tried to go in with as little knowledge as possible. Certain things, obviously, I picked up in the episode, finding out that John, obviously, Jack the Ripper, and George were friends. I mean, how far an extent of that past goes, we really don't know. But the way they talk about it is like they've been friends for a long time. Whether it's childhood friends or not, I don't know. But John's kind of a bit of a douchey friend because he brings up the fact that he's like, oh, George, you're so busy. You're too afraid to actually get out there. You're too afraid to take that leap. You're always wanting to write down these stories. But the fact of the matter is who knows if your stories will ever get published. And the fact is you're too much of a coward to go out there and adventure because you don't know how much that might affect your stories and stuff like that. I'm like, wow, John's a bit of a dick. I mean, obviously he's a huge douchebag for the fact is that he's Jack the Ripper. But obviously he comes to present day. Obviously so does George, trying to like apprehend him. That was such an interesting thing. Like he did it immediately, like, trying to be, a very upstanding, citizen. He's like, oh, I'm going to travel. And they handled the time travel situation very well, especially in George's case, because it's like, oh, like obviously you'd be overwhelmed, which obviously he's like, holy crap, this is so cool. Which I'll also talk about. The fact is, I like how the time travel looks. Obviously, it doesn't seem like there's much of a difference. It's like in a blink of an instant. But the fact is that like everything gets super cold, like the machine like starts freezing. Like even when people are breathing, their breath turns cold. So I thought that was kind of a nice touch. But like, especially when he meets Jane at first, and it's just kind of like a situation of like, oh, so can I talk to, oh, it's like, oh, you're the assistant curator. Can I talk to the person who runs it? And she's like, oh yeah, she's also a woman before, so you can stop being so rude about it. Kind of like putting her down because she's just a woman, like she doesn't have an important job. And he's like, oh, I apologize. Right. Society would be very different. I apologize. Which is very interesting. Like the fact is that he immediately catches himself. He's like, right. It's been like over 100 years. Obviously, I'm not going to sit here and do the math. I don't feel like doing that. So he's like, obviously, so things have been different. Obviously, things have progressed. Because it's also interesting when you have what the world is versus what Wells thought it was going to be. It's a situation where he thought like, oh, the world was going to be some utopian place. It's actually sad when you actually think about the fact is that John was right, that it wasn't going to be like that. That people are essentially animals that hunt and are to be hunted, and they're never going to change. And sadly, it is that way. That there's a destructive side of humanity, and it's sad that that George is sitting at a bar and he sees on his TV all the terrible things, and it brings a tear to his eye because it's like he thought that science would advance to the point that we move past all that and we're very just a peaceful society, but it turns out not to be the case. Obviously, at first he doesn't tell Jane who he really is. Obviously, he's like, yo, I'm an actor. You 100% caught me. But then it was kind of like, it's kind of interesting. I really like Jane because she's very funny. Like the fact that she makes that joke because she brings up the joke that like John that God, I keep switching everyone's name. George is kind of like, man, do men ever realize just how are women of this age so self-aware like you are? And she's like, nope, I'm the only one. In fact, they actually gave me an award for it. So I was like, look at you being cheeky. You're so funny. And the fact is, I said the word cheeky just also made me think of something else I need to bring up. The fact that isn't the actor who plays Jack the Ripper, I think his name is Josh Bowman. He played Daniel in Revenge, which I need to go back and finish. I think I only ever watched up to season 3. I do need to go back and see season 4. But nevertheless, it's like the moment I was seeing the previews for the show, I was like, dude, you're British. Another person that fools me. It's like you do a good American accent. Holy crap. I love always being surprised. Like I always find out someone's British or something just because I might see them in something else, or something might tempt me to go like, oh, something's a little like there's always this little subtlety about certain people's voices. I don't always catch it, but there's like been a very few occasions where I caught it where I'm like, you're not American, are you? Happen to look it up. It's like, oh, that person's not. Nevertheless, not the point. Just kind of want to throw that in there. But the fact of the matter is, an interesting thing, and I'm sure it's going to become obviously a bigger plot point going forward, is the fact is that, I mean, obviously a lot of this is just set up. Obviously, we're getting introduced to our main protagonist, obviously our main bad guy being John, but there's also like, we have George as well as Jane, kind of like the person who kind of grounds him to this time period, kind of telling him what's up, and the only person that really believes him. I mean, granted, I was wondering how he was going to get her to believe. I was like, oh man, is she just going to outright believe you? It's like, I mean, no one was like, man, she doesn't believe you. He's like, how are you going to prove it? He's like, oh, I'm going to show you. And he shows her a time machine and travels. I'm like, at first I'm like, oh man, the machine's not going to work. There's no way it is. There's no way. And it starts working. I'm like, oh, it worked. Because I didn't expect it to work to, end up proving him right. So I thought that was kind of cool. But, so she's like one of the few people that knows the truth about it. Also, we end up finding out that, he's also connected to this company, by this woman named Vanessa Anders. That company's, yeah. Like she runs this biotech company, Anders, and played by the lovely Nicole Ari Parker. I was like, oh, that's so cool when I saw her name pop up in the credits at the beginning. I was like, oh, that's cool. Didn't know she was going to be playing a main character. I don't think any of the previews I saw her, but it kind of makes sense why, because like her side of the story. I was wondering, I was like, okay, with this whole situation, there's going to be like some secret group backing him, isn't it? And it's like, oh, it turns out this is, because apparently he went back in time and talked to her when she was a freshman in college. And basically was telling her like, oh yeah, I'm your great grandfather or something like that, and gave her a letter to eventually give to him, to give to HG himself further into the future, being like, yeah, trust her, she'll help you. Which is a situation where obviously she gets to test later on in the episode and turns out, yeah, they are in fact related. But basically she's got this whole like very few people know about the truth. Like there's a few guards that know about it. Like obviously there's the main guard who brings up the question that obviously was going to come up, because it's time travel and everything. It's like, well, the fact of the matter is, can't you just go back before, Jack steal John? I don't know where I'm gonna go. Where I'm gonna go. I feel like if I call him by his name John, I have to go John Stevenson, but I don't know, or do I just call him Jack? I'll just go for John for now. I don't know. Instead of switching back and forth, but he's like, couldn't you just go back and stop John from taking the machine? He's like, well, no, because then that turns into a whole hairy situation, because every time you time travel, you poke a little hole in a time stream, just time-space continuum and whatnot, and basically every time you go back to roughly to the same points, or at least in that same area, you poke another hole, and basically that one hole, like you get enough points close enough together on the timeline that eventually it turns into a massive hole. So the timeline might implode, explode, rip apart, might mean the end of the world destruction. No, there's no telling. Even he's like, theoretically, it could be this, but honestly, I'm not 100% sure. Because even a time machine isn't something that he's 100% worked everything out for. It's currently disabled because obviously wanting to keep John here in the present day, which I like. That was kind of interesting to me because like I said, another thing I didn't really know about the show is whether or not time like will be like. I thought it was like, okay, you're going to just get to this present day and you're just going to be stuck there, which it seems like obviously a majority of the time is going to be here in the present. But obviously, as we see with the whole Vanessa situation, there is more time traveling involved. Obviously, the test said they were just related, but he said that he's her. Well, the reason why he said that he's her great great grandfather is because she herself told him before he went back in time to meet the younger her at some point. Obviously, the whole, as I've brought up with other time travel stuff like Timeless. As I meant to bring this up because obviously I did the whole watch list episode. Obviously for this month, and I include this, but it's like there's been a lot of time travel stuff. Like time travel must be the new thing lately because there's a lot of time travel stuff. This 12 Monkeys, Timeless, Legends of Tomorrow, technically even the Flash, because Flash actually obviously it has like time travel elements. So it's just so much. There's even that Fox comedy show called Making History. So, but nevertheless, we're getting back to the point of this. So it's going to be interesting seeing like exactly how the whole time travel thing will work in this show because obviously it's all about hunting down John. What I found fascinating is when Jane, obviously trying to buy time and everything, she talks to John and is basically like, oh yeah, you're Jack the Ripper, you're famous. He's like, oh, I'm what? I am? Kind of feeding into like his egotism. And he looks himself up and he says, oh man, yeah. And then he's like, wait, what? They don't know who I am? It's like, yeah, your identity was never revealed. It's like, but everyone knows H.G. Wells. It's like, well, yeah, because he made positive contributions. It's like, he starts getting pissed because, I mean, another thing I didn't know too is the fact is that his character would actually be a doctor too. And he's like, you know, he's almost pissed at Jane for talking down to him. It's like, the fact is, like, I'm a surgeon, I'm this, that. And it's so interesting. Obviously, he cares so much about reputation. Like, to me, that was so interesting. It's like, oh, how could they not know me? I'm such a famous, you know, I'm such a great and fantastic doctor back in the day. It's like, how could they not know about me? You know, he wants, so it's hard to say whether he really, because even he brought it up when he was talking to Wells earlier in the episodes, and it was kind of like, the fact is that in this time period, he's like, oh, he almost brags, says, I'm like, I'm an amateur in this world because there's like so many monsters and killers here. Which actually surprised me. It seems like that's going to be a theme when it comes to his story too. It's like him struggling with the monster inside of him. Because Jane is kind of like, oh, you don't have to be this monster. And even George is kind of like that too. This isn't who you have to be. Just go back to our time and face your punishment, which he's not willing to. Because he's like, I have no plans of changing. And then he goes into that room. I think the woman's name is Jules. Which I'll note, Jane almost got away. That was a pretty good escape. I mean, granted, I thought it was kind of interesting that they were trying not to wake him up. I guess like all that rust. I never thought about that before. If you knock someone out, it's best to kind of keep quiet because that way they're less likely to regain consciousness immediately. I guess it's something like your loud noises will probably kind of enter their system and make them kind of wake up quicker. So she's trying to be super quiet. Granted, it didn't work. She had an opportunity to run, but you know, Jane's not like that. She's like, I'm not going to run, you know, especially because he's got a. And then there was the whole situation with the lady Jules. Like, he went in there because he was tired of the whole conversation. He's like, I'm not going to change. I am this way and no one can stop me. And we hear like slash, slash, slash. I'm like, oh man, he ripped her up hard. And I was like, oh man, the moment they go in there, those people that work for Vanessa, the moment they go in there, just going to find a body. They go in there, she's still alive. I'm like, wait, what? And even Jane's like that, like, wait, what? So it does seem like because she brought it up, she's like, I can see it in your eyes. You don't want to be this monster. So it seems like it's kind of an instinct inside of him where it's like he's trying to keep it on. Like, he doesn't want to be like that. It's like he could have easily killed her, could have easily killed Jane. Obviously, Jane is leverage, but there is a part of him that doesn't want to be like that. So it's definitely going to be interesting going forward to see like him struggling with the monster compared to also with HG, who just wants to not, because HG had the gun on him earlier in the episode but didn't pull the trigger because he doesn't want to hurt him, because he was even saying like, hey, don't hurt him, like if you get him, it's like, oh, we need to arrest him and stuff, sure, but man, I think on some level I was thinking like, are we going to turn this like almost into like a science fictional police procedural in the sense of like, oh, I thought it was going to be like a special unit of cops or something, but it's like, no, it's like a full-blown company that's kind of secretly working with him. Well, Vanessa has a husband named Griffin, who's kind of like a soon-to-be senator, I guess. And obviously he's starting to ask a lot of questions like, oh, you're related to H.G. Wells and stuff like that. Oh, how? Oh, the fact is, oh, why did you tell me, honey? It's like, oh, and obviously he's a little suspicious, and I'm curious to see where that goes. I hope he doesn't, I mean, there's the obvious thing where it's kind of like, oh, he thinks his wife is having an affair with this dude or something. It's like all this British guy just happens to suddenly pop up, a guy that you've never mentioned before. So, I mean, it would never happen ill because they're related. So she'd never think about like something like that. So I'm guessing at some point she's going to have to admit, like, okay, honey, I didn't want to tell you this just because I found it. I wasn't 100% sure myself, but it turns out we're actually related, you know. So, but even then, it's just, I don't know. Like, obviously, just he rubs me the wrong way. And another note is that guy. He was obviously following, like, he bumps into George at first in the episode. George's kind of like, okay, excuse me. And then George is like, oh, are you following? He's like, I'm not following you, weirdo. And we see him taking pictures, well, particular video of John at the bar with that girl lady at the end of the episode. And it seems obviously he's following both of them. So it's like, wait, what's going on here? Now, part of me is also wondering, like, how far this goes. Obviously, we have one company that knows about him. But obviously, for obvious reasons, they know about, you know, in Vanessa's case, so obviously she would know about George. But what I'm very curious to find out is there going to be anyone else that knows? Like, is this particular person, is he, like, how is he related to all this? Is he like a great descendant of John's? Or what? Like, why did he specifically check them out? Is he actually did they cross paths with him at some point when they were young? Like, maybe it's a situation where he met both of them when he was super young, and he kept telling people that they were real, but everyone kept saying he was crazy, so he had to be locked up in mental facilities or something. And then, like, when time came, he actually sees both of them. He's like, no, I knew I wasn't crazy. They're real. Or could it be a situation where, like, he's a fan of John's and he wants to kind of help him or something? Because I feel like that might be where this goes to, where it's a situation where John kind of amasses a following. Maybe he's the only one we have to deal with, but maybe not. Another story I'm surprised never came up too is, like, George being like, oh man, my life back home. Oh no, I don't know if I'll... You know, he doesn't seem that too concerned about... Obviously, he wants to get back to his original time, more for the sake of, like, keeping the timeline as similar as possible, because it's like the longer him and John are here, the more likely things are to drastically change. Obviously, because there's no telling how much of a difference on the timeline their being here has already caused, so... I mean, because for him, he's divorced, so it's not like he has a wife and family to get back to. Not necessarily probably all that keen to get back to his colleagues either, because they kind of ridiculed him about the whole time machine situation, even when he had it built and everything. I was like, okay, George, don't you think you're being a little bit crazy? Don't let us have you committed or something. Also, I love the conversation he had with that head security dude being like, oh yeah, he was like, maybe you shouldn't read your books. He's like, really? Shouldn't I? He's like, well, you don't know. Maybe it influences what you write. He's like, well, maybe it's actually what inspired me to write. He's like, I'm not actually sure about this. He's like, and George is like, yeah, I'm not sure about it either. Once again, that whole cycle thing, like, maybe reading your own books is what helps you, inspires you to write all these books in the first place. Or maybe it make it so that, maybe that you write them kind of ruins it, and so you never decide to write them, and maybe you write something else entirely now. So... I'm very curious to see would be a situation where we flash back to moments from their lives in the past. Kind of, like I said, I'm curious to find out more about how they became friends. Like, how long has this whole situation with being Jack the Ripper been a thing for John? Is it just a recent thing? Because the way they looked at it in the newspapers and stuff, obviously when he Googled himself, it seemed like he only killed 5 prostitutes. They did say that John struck again. Also, like, kind of going to, I know I'm like all over the place. That's no surprise. If you've listened to any one of these, you'll realize I'm always all over the place. But there was a moment, obviously to prove that, obviously I brought up earlier, like, to prove that time travel was real, he took Jane like 3 days in the future and found out that she was one of the potential victims. But obviously that changed because not only were they able to come back in time and save the lady who was going to be the second victim, but we also... Well, I mean, everything else has changed too, so I wonder, will there be any going to the future or not? Because I also like how the time machine works too, in a sense of, like, it's a key component. Is like how the story works. Its effect is that the machine will automatically, after some time, auto return to whatever starting point it had before the most recent jump. So, for example, he went to 3 days into the future. So that starting point of 3 days ago, it will automatically go back if he doesn't have the key, because the key allows you to keep the time machine with you no matter where you go. So obviously that's what John wants, but now the machine's kind of broken down a little bit, obviously because he unplugged a lot of stuff to stop him. I was wondering if there were going to be any ramifications, like for both him, John, or Jane for doing that, because they were such close proximity to him. I'm already very heavily invested to find out like how this all will work, keeping his secret and everything. Obviously, well, I wonder will they go through the trouble of giving him a fake identity and stuff like that, maybe a fake work history and stuff like what will he do like in his free time when he's not hunting John? Obviously taking in this world that's before him and everything. Now that I'm sitting here and thinking about it, isn't this the first like past the future time traveling? Technically, I mean, Legends kind of has. I know I'm crossing, into other TV shows, but I think this is the first one, at least that I can think of, that's kind of like, oh, I'm going from the past to the future and kind of staying in present day. Because you have something like 12 Monkeys, which is like going from the future to the past. I mean, then kind of like even further to the past and stuff like that. I wonder, will that be something, or will it all kind of be relative to the time period? Will it always be kind of modern day stuff? I feel like they're trying to keep it as stationary, because I do know that this is based off a book, what was originally a book, which was later then adapted into a movie as well. I think the movie came out like 79. I'm not sure about the book, but the book's kind of owed itself too. So I've never watched any or read anything. I did find out because I was curious, is there anyone in the casting? At least one name I recognize. The actor who played H.G. Wells in the movie is Malcolm McDowell. I was like, wait, what? So like, I'm sure there was probably other actors on that list I noticed, but I probably knew, but I never really looked into it, because I don't want to mess around and slip across and come across some spoilers. So like I said, I don't know how this compares to the movie or even the book, but I'm very interested to see like how this will all play out, where it will go. Like I brought up earlier, like, who is this mysterious guy? What part will Griffin play in this? Vanessa's obviously got her ambitions. Obviously, she wants to help out because, it's the right thing to do. But the fact of the matter is, I get the feeling maybe we're going to be in a situation where, like, HG's going to have to keep his eye on her to make sure she doesn't try to take the time machine for herself. Because even, like, they were like, oh, yeah, we're looking for the key. And he's like, oh, I got it. And it's just kind of like, oh, okay, good. You have the key. He's like, and that's where it's going to stay. So, obviously, because Vanessa's devoted a lot of her life to this. Obviously, at the beginning, when he told her who he was in her freshman year, she probably thought, oh, he's just some crazy dude, but she kind of held on to that belief. I feel like there's got to be more to it because she held on to it all these years. There's got to be more to it than, like, what she's just kind of chalking it up to, like, oh, I just took a chance on believing. It's like, no, like, you're here for a reason. And I mean, that's kind of what she's also trying to figure out too, is like, what part does she play in all of this? Like I said, I get the feeling like this has to go beyond him. I feel like there's got to be some kind of cult or group that knows about this. Like, whether they're on John's side, whether they're on H.G. Wells' side, whether they're just on the side of time travel in general. There's a thought that crossed my mind. Obviously, like, there's a lot of many different layers to it. Obviously, when we take someone, like, we know a little bit about Vanessa's past. She talks about the fact that her mom and dad died when she was like 11. Now, part of me is thinking like, well, the fact of the matter is you're related and everything. That's your great-great-granddaughter. Obviously, something must go wrong, and Jane goes back in time with H.G. Wells or something. Like, I'm thinking maybe she's Vanessa's, like, great-great-grandmother. Maybe that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like I said, we know that they're related, but once again, like, that's the whole reason why she said that he's her great-great-grandfather is because she heard it from him, who heard it from her, and, and the whole cycle thing. But I'm thinking, like, what if it turns out to be it's actually, because another question came up too, is like, oh, the fact of the matter is, how will you live your life? Because there's the danger of knowing the future. Because if you know the future, you're going to try to avoid it. So if he knows that he has a great-great-granddaughter, will he try to be with someone because he's like, oh, this person might be the reason why Vanessa is this way. But it's like, what if it turns out that, like, something goes wrong and he spends the rest of his time with Jane and she turns out to be, there's a lot there. That's the thing that kind of immediately went to my head. And maybe that's not the case. Because when it's all said and done, he will have to go back to his original time at some point. So it's going to be interesting seeing whether that's true or not. I feel like that's kind of the most obvious thing, but because it's so obvious, I'm like, maybe that's not necessarily going to be true. Like I said, it seems like it might be a possibility. Granted, I don't know all the strings that would be attached to, like, what particular events would have to lead to things playing out that particular. I can think of some, like I've kind of brought up before, maybe somehow they get trapped in the past or something like that. Like I said, just kind of have to sit back, wait, and see how this all plays out. So I'm just, so many questions, so many thoughts kind of flowing through my head. I'm very interested to see where this goes next episode. So But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.